Welcome to A Constitutionalist. I'm your guest host this evening, Roger Weidner, sitting in for Michael Marsh. And I have the honor of having as my two guests my 97-year-old mother, Frances Weidner, a political activist and strong supporter. She's been my strongest supporter in this
great warrior.
Yes. And then also Wilbur GASTON, who heads a group called A Voice for Children, who I met some 10 years ago, who, along with his deceased wife, Pamela GASTON, were a powerful force in bringing about a change in the corruption that's going on in our court system today that brings us all together, and that are listening, that it is so dangerous what is going on in our country, in our state, in our country today, this elimination of the idea of due process of law, constitutional government. And I'm an authority on this. I've spoken in the Oregon Supreme Court, in the House and Senate, wherever I speak. No judge, no one questions the truthfulness of what I'm about to tell you about what our system is. I say you cannot have constitutional government unless you have constitutional courts.
That's right.
And a constitutional court, the judge is a neutral. He is an impartial, sworn referee. That's what his oath of office says. It says that he swears that as he performs, in fact, he cannot assume the duties of his office. It was so important to our founding fathers here in Oregon that when they drafted the Constitution, they put in there the specific oath that a magistrate must take. He must not only take the oath, swear, he must sign the oath, and he must file that oath with a proper authority.
And there's not a lawyer in the state of Oregon that has signed that oath or taken that oath.
But
not a one.
What they swear to do is to see that you get due process. And what is due process? Due process is this fairness. I tell people that in this, and that we just, with what is going on in our state, our country today, this elimination of the rights of the citizen, the state becoming all-powerful, arresting, eliminating habeas corpus, this is exactly what was going on 225 years ago when a group of men, 56 men, basically mostly landed Virginia aristocrats, signed the Declaration of Independence, which was, if had they lost, they would have been all treated like bin Laden would have been treated if he's caught, or they would have been hung. Because
I believe most of them were hung,
well, not George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and Monroe and those that were the founding fathers. There were others. John Adams from Massachusetts, he was not a landed aristocrat. But this basic concept that had not existed before anywhere in the world, where you had the sovereignty of the citizenry, yes. The sovereignty of the citizenry, and I'm an authority on this. In this country, we have a single class of citizens, all equal before the law. And those are divided into two groups. You have public employees and you have private employees. And if they're a public employee and elected or appointed to office, they must take that oath. And that oath says that they will recognize the rights of the citizen. That's what the Constitution is. It's a limitation on government, not on the people, on the government. It says, government, you cannot do these things. You cannot take someone's children. You cannot take their property. You cannot take anything, yes. Public employee.
It doesn't give you anything, actually.
But you cannot take a public employee unless you give that person due process of law.
That's right.
And due process of law
constitutional due process
is a fair hearing before an impartial judge. And that is what has been stripped out, had been stripped out of the system. I had no idea that it had been so stripped out of the system when I got into this, Brother Will, almost 20 years ago when I met Jeanette Kent.
Me too.
I thought we had, in my case, that we caught a crooked attorney that had wiped out his partner, and that when we had all of his employees that came forward and said,
it was a small cabal.
I said, well, once we get into court, because this is how naive I was, I thought, well, it's going to be difficult to get into court because of Jeanette Kent. She was very distraught at the time,
Yeah.
and to get the story out. But we went into Judge Crookham's courtroom, and Jeanette got on the stand and laid it all out. I was so impressed. Milton Brown, the little thieving attorney, he couldn't speak. He was beat red. On the stand. Now this was 19 years ago, in 1988, and I thought, we have won.
And what was the judge's ruling on that?
He signed an order that turned the property over forthwith. Now I was on inactive status, and we had a friend who was not a friend, an attorney that I knew that was an accomplished attorney that won the case. But then the attorney that we hired, Gary McMurray, became hostile with me.
Yeah.
So your
mother was in all these court hearings.
But not that, she wasn't in the action, and this was building up to the case right after we won the case. Then the bar started, everyone started getting hostile with me.
Retaliate.
And so I started going into the courtrooms with large crowds of people. I'm a former attorney, public prosecutor. 30 years ago, I was the government. When I say that, if some police officer arrested someone, or some child service division, or some bureaucrat wanted to have legal action taken, they would come to me in the Consumer Fraud Department, and I would listen to what they had to say and then file the papers. So that I had that kind of background. Now we had won the case. The assets were awarded to Jeanette Kent.
How much did Jeanette get, Roger?
To date, she has got a fat zero, and probably have spent a couple of $1 million in going into court. When I realized what was happening, that the judge, Lee Johnson, turned and was just ignoring what was said, I said, well, we'll get a crowd of people. Yep. So I brought in 70 people. I brought in retired fire chiefs. My father is a retired deputy chief in the Portland Fire Department. My mother and this group in the courtroom. I said, now we're going to force that crooked Judge Lee Johnson.
With all those stable, honest citizens.
Yes, sitting there. And when I walked into the courtroom, I'd circulated a notice in the community telling the people that what was going on and that they were trying to cover up this stuff. Please attend. And when he got on the bench, he said, Mr. Weidner, he said, I'm sitting there with this courtroom, and he says, you in the courtroom, I want all of you to know that I've had a chance to observe Mr. Weidner during these proceedings, and I find his conduct outrageous and unprofessional.
Outrageous.
And I said, I'm in the courtroom. He said, I see you. I said, well, if you're going to attack me, Judge Johnson, I want to be called to the stand so I can testify truthfully. He said, one more word out of you, Weidner, and I'll have you taken out of here. And he had done that previously in his courtroom when Attorney Lindstedt was lying, and I stated it, and he ordered the guards to remove me, so I said it again. I said, I said, you've done that in the past, Judge Johnson, when I've tried to speak the truth in this courtroom. And he said, guards, and Henry Serbaugh said that he saw one of the guards pull a gun when he came in. And I said, when he said that, I said, now, Lindstedt, tell, the attorney was standing, I said, tell these people to their face what you'll be saying behind my back. And when they took me out, they said Judge Johnson threatened Jeanette Kent that she could impose sanctions if he found her claim frivolous. Now this was, we were trying to recover this from the attorney that we'd hired, Norman Lindstedt, who we had put in as the personal representative because I was not on active status, who had turned on us, and we're trying to drive the attorney away from the case because he is fighting us. I stood and physically threatened him, Will, in the court. I'm warning you, Lindstedt, get out of this case. And he's down hiding behind his attorney. The Oregon State Bar hired an attorney. Here, the Oregon State Bar, which is set up to protect the citizenry, that was the purpose of it, is now hiring attorneys to protect the thieving attorneys and at the same time attacking me. This was 19 years ago that when they started this.
So your mother, Mrs. Frances Weidner, she was involved in this case, was she?
Well, where she really came in her own, always there early on supporting, coming in with my father and people in the neighborhood. But I got involved trying to help some pastors recover property out in Clackamas County. I'd been arrested by when I was arrested in Judge Johnson's courtroom. I was tried and convicted in Judge Ellis's courtroom.
I remember that one. I was involved in that campaign with you.
And in Judge Ellis's courtroom, when I tried to cross-examine the witnesses, Lee Johnson and Norman Lindstedt, the crooked attorney, I was threatened with the contempt by Judge Ellis. And I brought in 10 all these retired people, retired fire chiefs, said my conduct was appropriate. And the bar called as witnesses against me Norman Lindstedt and Lee Johnson. And they got on the stand and I tried to cross-examine them. And the judge blocked me from cross-examining him. I said, well, I have a right to cross-examine. He said, you're going to have the same trouble with me, Weidner, that you had with. So this was threatening.
And this was Judge Johnson?
No, this was Judge Ellis, who found me guilty and sent me to 6 months in jail.
Oh, yes.
So when I was out and I was there, he held me 30 days because of there was heat. So when I got out, I started going around the city, passing out handbills about what was going on, and I met these pastors, Helen and Chet Jones, who were having their property taken out in Clackamas County. Same thing, crooked attorneys stealing their property. Yeah. And so they had me put on the property, and I was on the property, and the sheriff came out and he arrested me, pulled the gun when he came on. And they tried me and convicted me in Judge Maurer's court. My mother and father and neighbors came in. And when I started to speak, he said, I'll clear this courtroom. And he was threatening and intimidating. And so he told the jury it made no difference if Mr. Weidner owned the property. The only question was he on it? And so they found me guilty and sent me 10 days in jail. And they walked me right out of the courtroom.
That's called in limine. You see, they didn't let...
that's not. A motion in limine is a preliminary motion. But they walked me right into the jail, and while I was in jail, I was subpoenaed, by Milton Brown into Multnomah County, where I'd been ordered to stay out of the court by Judge Ellis. So I was subject to being arrested if I came in or if I did not come in. And so I got a crowd of people, went down to the courthouse, and when I went to the court, to presiding court to make a record that I was being subpoenaed into a court that I'd been ordered to stay out of. And when I went to the room where I'd been subpoenaed, there were guards all over. And as I was walking down the hall, I saw Judge Keyes coming out of his chambers. And I had been in the DA's office with him and knew him, and he'd been telling everyone in the courthouse knows that Weidner's nuts. Wow. And so I said, Keyes, come here. And he ran onto the elevator. And I went up and I held the doors open. I said, Keyes, come here. And he's turning his head in the back of the elevator. We went into the courtroom. The judge wouldn't come out. I said, I've been subpoenaed into this courthouse, been ordered to stay out of it. And the guard said, come on, Roger, let's go down to the other courtroom. So when we went down there, when we walked in, I walked up to the door, and there's this Herring who had arrested me previously. And Mother came to, she says, it's over. And I stepped forward. I said, it's over. And like this, he says, you've assaulted me, you're under arrest. I thought, my God, they are going to do me, and do not let them arrest me. And they jumped on me and were choking me to the down. And as I turned around, everyone else's eyes were big and round like this, except my mother. And my mother, she was standing there. They had her arms pulled back.
Peterson,
no, this was in Abraham's courtroom. But they were violently, but she was getting over in one foot to kick him.
Oh, yeah. She did kick Peterson.
Yeah, well.
Going down the hall.
And then the next event, shortly after that, we were out in Clackamas County. And they had ordered my psychiatric evaluation. They had done that early on. And then they ordered another one. And when I went to the psychiatrist, I said, I took a group with me. I said, you can ask me anything that you want, except I'm going to have people witness it, so they wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Well, then when I went into court with a group out there, had another crowd, and in they came, and they locked the doors, shuttered the windows. I thought, they're going to do it. They're going to do me in. And I looked around, and everyone's eyes were like this again, and like a child, I was 60 years old, and I called out, Mother! And Mother, who was sitting in the jury box, I thought she was going to do a one-handed Gilda-spring over that railing. Up she went, up to that judge, and she's Gregory Milne. She says, "What's the meaning of this? What's the meaning of this?" And he was backing away from her, like she was a poisonous snake.
Well.